Welcome to the Omar Alayli podcast, your go-to podcast for exploring the diverse fields driving space exploration and technology. I'm your host, Omar Alayli, and today we're joined by Kevin Stadnyk, co-founder and CEO of OBRUTA Space Solutions. OBRUTA is a Canadian company that focuses on developing rendezvous, proximity operations, and docking technologies for spacecrafts. Kevin, thanks so much for being here. It's great to have you.
Yep, thank you very much, Omar. It's great to be here today and talking all about OBRUTA.
Perfect. Kevin, most people finishing a master's degree either dive into a PhD or join the industry workforce. But you took a different path, launching your own startup from your thesis work on orbital debris removal. What drove you to take that leap into entrepreneurship, and what first inspired you to study aerospace engineering?
Certainly, I did take a little bit of a unorthodox path to get to where I am today. I've always had a lifelong interest in space. Like many in the industry, wanted to be an astronaut when I grew up. But one of the best pieces of advice that I ever got was to just follow your passions and end up at the astronaut position. You don't just put every chip on that spot. And so, as I went through my undergrad and I decided I wanted to research things a bit further, continue my education, I went into a Master's of Applied Science at Carleton University in Ottawa, Canada. And I focused on techniques for deploying and capturing space debris or other objects using large tethered nets. Uh, During my master's, I saw how this wasn't just an academic problem, but the issue of space debris and the threat it posed to the orbital environment was increasing globally. And that was one of the initial factors that led me to pursue entrepreneurship and starting a company around this technology in order to help the broader industry and the world at large.
What were some of the biggest insights you gained from your thesis work?
So my thesis focused on the portion of the problem, specifically when you approach a piece of debris in orbit, you would deploy a large net and shoot it out, capturing another object. I was actually continuing the work of my now co-founder, Dr. Kirk Hovel, who in his master's looked at the problem from the angle of once you've already captured a piece of debris, using this novel tethered net, could you stabilize its tumbling motion in order to safely tow it back down into the atmosphere to be disposed of? So we learned a lot about spacecraft guidance, navigation, and control, about rendezvous, prox ops, and docking, as well about the broader issues of space sustainability, what is being done in the industry. At the time, really only in the academic realm and just starting in the commercial realm. And I've been fortunate enough to be in this industry from virtually day one, watching it grow commercially over the last several years.
Now, one thing we know about successful entrepreneurs is their ability to pivot and realign based on their own research and market trends. Obruta initially set out to develop orbital debris removal technologies, but eventually pivoted to GNC tech, right? Guidance, navigation, and control. What were some of the biggest challenges in orbital debris removal technology that influenced this shift?
Well, when we started the company back in 2019, we approached it from primarily this academic angle. At the time, we saw there were solutions that were viable technically out there. But starting that entrepreneurial journey, we initially neglected some of the business aspects because we only ever had the engineering perspective at the forefront. And so as we continued to develop the company, we got out into the broader commercial industry. We started talking with customers from government agencies to other startups to more established space companies. We very quickly realized the issue that companies were just not willing to pay for space debris removal at the time. And at this point in time, when the podcast is being recorded today, still there are very little incentives for companies to clean up their space debris. that is changing and things are moving in the right direction. But when you look at the issue, it's hard enough to get most people to clean up their garbage here on Earth, and it's even harder to get them to do it in space. So until there are larger policy shifts around the globe, it will be quite difficult for space debris removal alone to be a viable business model. However, stemming from that, there are many viable technologies, and that is where we sort of stumbled upon rendezvous, proxops, and docking in a way. Now, both my co-founder and myself have a background in spacecraft guidance, navigation, and control, or GNC. And what we learned through all of these customer conversations that we had is that they were much more interested about how we were building the spacecraft to fly from point A to point B autonomously in space, rather than actually cleaning up maybe their satellite at the end of life or another piece of space debris. And through that realization from just getting out there and talking to as many customers as possible, we realized that we could provide much more value to the broader industry by enabling others with this RPO capability and really supporting the industry, getting everyone else to market faster by alleviating the need to develop it in-house when there's no other commercial solution today for this kind of technology.
So OBRUTA has, first of all, what does OBRUTA stands for?
OBRUTA is Latin for debris. And that gets back to your last question there. When we did start the company, in the lens of space debris removal, we named it OBRUTA, sort of, debris removal. But over time, as companies pivot, we've changed, but we did keep the name. We think it's unique. It stands out in the industry for sure. And really, space debris, space sustainability is still one of our objectives with the company. By enabling others with autonomous rendezvous, proxops, and docking, we can help them and clean up space debris. We can help companies refuel or conserve their fuel on orbit or even repair each other. And the list goes on and on. So everything we're doing today still moves us towards our larger goal of space sustainability.
OBRUTA has focused on developing RPOD technology for autonomous operations in space for the long run, right? For our listeners, can you give us an idea of what this RPOD autonomy really means for spacecraft or satellite missions? And why is this level of autonomy so crucial for future space operation?
Certainly. So rendezvous, proximity operations, and docking, or just RPOD for short, is the mission sequence in space of flying from your starting point, point A, up to another object or another spacecraft, point B, and successfully docking with it or grabbing it with a robotic arm. So the way to break it down, rendezvous is the broad strokes getting from your starting point in orbit and really starting to align with the orbit of your client vehicle or object. The proximity operations, once you close that gap in the rendezvous phase, is operating, like it says, in proximity around the other object. How do you make sure you operate so that you don't accidentally fly into it, bump it, anything like that? So this could include everything from maintaining a distance and observing its motion in space to make sure that it's tumbling or flying the way that you expected before you got there, or even just observing it or inspecting it for any damages or changes that might have happened from micrometeorite impacts or anything else on orbit. And finally, the docking or final approach in docking is when you go from your proximity point in towards that client space object and have that safe and controlled connection with it, in a similar vein to how astronauts on vehicles would connect with, dock with the International Space Station in order to get there.
So I know that you've been validating your RPOD or the Rendezvous, Prox, Op, and docking software on the International Space Station in collaboration with the NASA's Astrobee project. Can you tell us more about what that partnership looks like and how this validation process is helping to strengthen OBRUTA's technology?
Certainly. So, as you said, we have been testing our algorithms and machine learning models on board the International Space Station since February of this year. We had this opportunity in part to a few different grants and awards. Namely, is the NASA's National Lab Award, in which we are given time on board the International Space Station to utilize their Astrobee robots. These are small, free flying robots, about 30 centimeters in size, boxes. You can think of maybe sort of a milk crate size box flying around the space station. They're equipped with various sensors like cameras, small LiDARs, and they use a similar system to a hobby aircraft electric duct fan to suck in air from inside the space station and shoot them out little jets in order to move around in 6-degree freedom space. So, through this project and through funding from the Canadian Space Agency, we developed our autonomous RPOD software, and we were able to upload it onto these Astrobee robots. We have two of them that we've been using on board the space station, and we've been testing out various trajectories, guidance algorithms, different paths and controllers to control these robots effectively, as well as testing out our AI or machine learning computer vision models, in which we went from simulation to the real world, as well as collecting real world data on board the space station and during these tests in order to train more robust models and test out how those perform. So, in doing all of this over the last year, we've flown 3 times on 3 different missions on board the space station, and we have a fourth scheduled for later this year. We were also the first team to apply AI specifically on board the Astrobees, and we're actually the first Canadians to utilize the platforms as well.
Using AI through computer vision, I would assume?
Yes, yeah, correct. Yeah, we're primarily using the computer vision because optics, vision based optics, are much lighter weight and consume much less power than more traditional sensors like radar and LiDAR. And that's one of the main innovations at OBRUTA. We can miniaturize the overall RPOD system and make it a lot more flexible for unknown events that it might face, any vehicle might face in space, by using a vision based system as opposed to a more traditional LiDAR or radar based system.
And when do you expect to do your experiments outside of the International Space Station in like real space environment? Is it something can happen soon?
Yeah, it's something we're working towards right now. So, as you mentioned, yeah, we have been testing inside the space station, which is a good laboratory environment. The microgravity environment cannot be effectively and replicated on Earth. There's always some small changes that will go into any laboratory setting trying to replicate that. So, the ability to test out these algorithms on orbit has been fantastic for us. However, there are a few differences inside the space station. One is the air and vents and fans and other circulation going around the space station. Sometimes those will push the Astrobees off course. Now, in having to face these challenges, we have been able to show that our guidance algorithms and controllers are robust enough to overcome these sudden perturbations, which aren't as present or immediately present in space, but it is just another testament to how our algorithms are performing. The other major change, unlike out in the vast darkness of space, where the lighting is quite a bit different, inside the space station has uh, manufactured light. We are operating with the lights on primarily, and there's also a lot of clutter on the walls, and the walls are white wires and computers, laptops, and other things stored all over every surface of the station. So when you compare that to what you traditionally see outside the station, the stars and the vast blackness of space, it is quite different. Now, in doing this, it's not completely lost, though. We are still testing a lot of things, and it is, in some cases, a better stress test for the vision algorithms to be able to pick out their targets, what they're looking at and trying to find amongst all of this clutter inside the space station. One of the biggest changes will be the lighting environment, overcoming that with our vision models and properly validating with the real dynamic environment of space once we go outside for that mission. So currently, we are looking at late 2025 and early 2026 to be going into orbit for a full-scale RPOD validation mission.
And that would be readiness level 8?
Yeah, so we'll be looking at about a TRL, technology readiness level of 8 at that point in time. At the moment, our software sits at about a 7 after these tests on board the space station.
Cool. So the space industry, as you know, has unique challenges with the regulatory and international standards, especially when developing innovative and decentralized technologies. How have different regulations and standards affected OBRUTA's GNC development, particularly as you navigate international markets?
Right now, the in-orbit servicing markets are at their very early stages of development. We're slowly seeing policy changes come into place that are moving towards the direction of servicing satellites in orbit, repairing them, refueling them. We've first seen this through policy changes in which objects you can interact with in orbit. New ones are coming in for lifetime, maximum lifetimes in orbit, where traditionally you had up to 25 years to deorbit your satellite. Now it's being lowered to even 5, and potentially, as the trend continues, it might get even lower. So in terms of Rendezvous and ProxOps, there's still a lot of work to be done to lay the rules of the road up in space, exactly how you can approach an object, what sort of distances you should keep away from other objects, who gets to define that. Is it on a per customer basis? Is it a standard across the industry? So a lot of this is still up in the air. Some of it has to be figured out through seeing where the industry moves to, best practices, and potentially even a little bit of trial and error. We've been fortunate enough to help contribute to some of the groups who are recommending best practices and potential standards for orbital rendezvous, ProxOps, and docking, as well as broader satellite servicing. And really, it will take more time and broader industry cooperation to lay the rules of the road.
Well, as you just said, like with the interest and with so many new actors and startups engaging in satellite servicing solutions and in orbit operations, there's also a growing need for hardware and software standardization. What's your take on the need for standardization by agencies like NASA, ESA, the Chinese CNSA, and how do you balance these needs at OBRUTA?
Well, standardization can be good, but it is always important not to rush into any standardization, which may stifle innovation. One of the areas I would highlight for that would be in the servicing interfaces that are being proposed. Right now, at OBRUTA, we don't develop satellite servicing interfaces, such as magnetic capture plates or refueling interfaces. Our RPO system works in tandem with externally developed interfaces, and we're happy to operate with whatever is installed on the spacecraft. And so with that in mind, We've seen as the industry's developed, initially there were a handful of different interfaces being proposed. Now there's about 30 to 50 globally that we're seeing being worked on, from the very earliest stages to more mature ones that have already been proven in space. Now, if governments and regulatory bodies came in very early in this process and they said, this is the standard you have to use for servicing a satellite, for connecting to them mechanically, for interfacing with them, for fluid transfer, for refueling, that would potentially stifle any future innovation in terms of improvements to those interfaces, or even what the industry would prefer for those interfaces. So, in a way, we've seen that being left open for more industry input, and only some guidelines and best practice recommendations placed around the development of these interfaces to ensure that everyone's on the same path, but that nothing is stifled. So I think overall, standardization is good, but at this very early stage of the industry, it should be oftentimes approached cautiously to make sure that we aren't stepping on the toes of innovation, and that we are going to reach a great endpoint.
Now, the current space industry landscape is pretty satellite heavy. In 2023, I think 92% of SpaceX's launches were for satellite deployment. Where do you see the space industry needing to diversify beyond satellites? And where does GNC tech come into play in this expansion?
I think overall, satellites and the increased launch of satellites is generally a good thing. It's a healthy indicator of how the space industry is growing. One of the things I think on all of these satellites is that over time, we're going to see how they are used change. Right now, if you want to get to your final orbit in space, you will need a propulsion system on board your satellite. The fuel tanks and the thrusters and everything else that goes into that with the avionics will constitute quite a bit of mass, quite a bit of cost, and that even adds into the launch cost for your satellite as well. And innovation to move the industry in a new direction are orbital transfer vehicles. These satellites which launch into orbit carrying the customer payload that doesn't need its own propulsion system anymore. This orbital transfer vehicle, essentially a space taxi, in the same way the airplane would bring you to an airport and then you take a taxi to your hotel. Right now, if you take an orbital transfer vehicle, you're doing the same thing. The launch vehicle will take you into space, and the orbital transfer vehicle will bring that customer satellite to its end destination. Before this, it was like if the airplane had to land at your hotel. The rocket would have to take you exactly to your destination. And on some of these rideshare missions, which have many, many customers, hundreds of customers in some cases, and very diversified end orbits, it wasn't practical or possible for all of them to get to where they're going. And so they would have to bring their own propulsion along the way. That's just one example of how the industry is changing. And I think over time, you're going to see, as more space infrastructure is developed, we're going to see consolidation around these sort of infrastructures similar to Earth. We don't have every single car on Earth carrying a lifetime supply of gas. You have centralized gas stations and refueling networks to refuel those gas stations. And when the cars need gas, you go to the gas station. Where I expect the industry will go will be centralized refueling stations, orbital outposts, where a satellite can go to be repaired, swap out components, it can be refueled, or even wait for a while to conserve its own fuel before having to go out for a new mission. Same thing for in-space manufacturing. Rather than sending up a entire orbital factory that has to carry all of the raw material, the manufacturing technology, as well as a return capsule, you may see more centralized manufacturing capabilities on orbital outposts, on private space stations, where you could host this kind of infrastructure. So I expect a more node and hub and spoke model as space develops. And even though we're going to continue seeing more and more and more satellites being launched for different purposes, these new kinds of infrastructure capabilities will also be advancing alongside them to change how we're operating in space, but build towards that larger in-space economy.
Let's zoom on the capabilities of OBRUTA. Are there any emerging applications for rendezvous and docking outside the satellite sector where you see OBRUTA making an impact?
Certainly. So, although we have many different applications within space, rendezvousing, so you can deliver things like fuel or logistics, life extension capabilities, component swapping, our RPO capability can be used as additional sensors on board the spacecraft. Because it is a vision-based, optic-based system, all of those optics can be used as additional star trackers on board the spacecraft to help localize its position in orbit, to just know where that satellite is. It can also be used as space situational awareness capabilities, watching other objects in orbit, tracking them, and knowing where they are with sometimes a greater accuracy than what ground based telescopes or radar measure. This is important because space is getting very congested, and these servicing vehicles won't always have jobs to be doing in space. You won't always be delivering fuel or moving another satellite around. So during that downtime, the ability to contribute to the overall space situational awareness network and help keep space safe and monitor the objects to make sure that everyone's adhering to the rules up there will be very important. And our RPOD kit, the RPO system that we develop, will be a major contribution towards both satellite servicing as well as space situational awareness.
And this RPOD kit is going to be hardware also. So you're now finalizing the software, and you're going to be working in parallel for the kit, right?
Yes. So we have been developing the software in-house at OBRUTA, and we are testing that on board the space station today. Now, in order to streamline some of the applications within the industry and streamline getting companies to the commercial market quicker, we have come to the realization that offering a standardized hardware package that contains all of the necessary sensors, compute systems, as well as our autonomy software is the best way to do this, to get companies to the commercial market the quickest. One of the pain points we realized is that in companies down selecting their own sensors, potentially they would come to us with 2 or 3 sensors they would like to use for their vehicle. Our software can use those. We can work with any optical sensor at the end of the day. But what that requires is us retraining all of the computer vision models for those specific set of sensors. And in doing that, it costs time to do that machine learning training. It costs a lot of money for the compute costs. And if we can alleviate that by having a standardized set of sensors to take any spacecraft from any point A to any point B in space safely and reliably and autonomously, then we can pass those cost savings on to the end customer.
So when you talk autonomy, are you talking about complete hands-off autonomy, or how it's going to be like?
So our end goal at OBRUTA is full autonomy. We want to see a in-space economy where there are hundreds or even thousands of dockings a day for everything from refueling to moving crew and cargo around from space stations, orbital outposts every single day. We understand that that's not completely viable today, and it will take a phased approach to get there. So in order to prove out the reliability of our system, initially it will be human supervised with autonomous capabilities where appropriate. What I mean by that is if you imagine the path you would fly in space from your point A to your point B, we can break up that path with what we call waypoints. And at every single waypoint, it is a stable point in the orbit where the satellite can sort of sit and wait and not really be pulled around by the effects of gravity, drift off, like if you had an unanchored boat sitting in the water and it gets pulled by the current. It's a stable point. And so what that allows us to do is offer points along the mission trajectory for an operator to review the data, review the footage, and give the next go or no go command to the next waypoint. So that way, they're able to ensure that at every phase of the mission, things are operating as expected. And if at any point they would like to abort, they can do that either at the waypoint when we have full control and all the time in the world with the vehicle, or during transit from one waypoint to the next. We can always press that red button and abort from that trajectory and try again at another point in time. So in this phased approach, the operators will have full control over the whole mission at any point in time. However, between the waypoints can be fully autonomous. Over time, we can space out these waypoints as we eventually progress to full autonomy once we are fully comfortable with the system and our customers are as well.
One of the most complex parts of space missions is what you call the last mile in proximity operations. And that's when you're in the final stage of approaching a target, right? Can you help us understand what goes in the last mile of prox op, and how does OBRUTA's technology manage this complex phase of a mission?
Certainly. So the reason it's dangerous or higher risk for the last mile portion is simply because when you're operating two very high value space assets in proximity with one another, the risk of a collision can cause a lot of damage to those vehicles, potentially the loss of them. And when we're talking for satellites, this could be anywhere from a few $1,000,000 to several hundreds of millions of dollars. So we have to be very careful that at any point we are never going to collide with another object. There are a lot of stories over the history of human spaceflight in which vehicles have nearly collided or even had some misalignments during their dockings and bumped each other along the way. Thankfully, we've never had any catastrophes in doing this, but there have been many close calls. So we always need to make sure that we are in control of the vehicle, we understand the environment, and we know what we're getting into as we're going in for that final approach and docking. OBRUTA's technology supports this through our vision-based relative navigation system, providing a view of the satellite's environment to the satellite and to the operator. And the guidance and control system provide a optimal path for the spacecraft to fly. And at any point along that path, if either the automatic abort system or the ground operator deems that something is wrong or it's too risky, it will abort that and we can remove ourselves from the issue so that at no point will the two spacecraft collide. We also designed the system in a few ways to just ensure, just through the design, that this won't happen. One example of that is the trajectories used outside of the final approach and docking when you're just closing the distance between the two spacecraft. We designed the trajectories in a way that even if we lost full control of the vehicle, all the power shut off or the engines, the thrusters stopped working, and we just had to keep drifting on, we would never be on a collision course. The way the orbits and gravity and perturbations in space would pull you, it would make sure that you would not collide with the vehicle and you would end up at a safe, stable waypoint external to the vehicle. So that's just one of the ways we account for the safety, and we always are keeping that in mind when we're developing the system.
So your RPOD, is it only on the chaser, or is it also applies on the target? Does it have to be on both the chaser and the target, or only one of them?
Only one of them. So contrary to some older or different systems, we only need this RPOD kit on one of the vehicles that are doing the docking. We are also designing the system to be extremely flexible in that we don't require fiducial markers, any sort of target marker or retroreflector in order to be doing the docking. And we also don't require any crosslinks or communication between the two vehicles during the docking as well. We want this to be as easy as possible at the end of the day, almost like parking your car. You don't think about driving into that parking spot, and that parking spot is not giving you any aids outside of the painted lines just telling you where to go. There's no markers to have to track with the system. There's no reflectors telling you that you are aligned with your car. It's just you pulling into that spot, making sure that you're aligned within the tolerances allowed, and that you safely park the car. That's the same way we're approaching this. And when you think about it, that's where the industry goes in the sci-fi world. If you watch Star Wars or Star Trek, you don't see a lot of aids helping the spaceships as they land somewhere. They just do it. And that's what we want today's spacecraft to be doing with our tech.
And with non-cooperative targets, like a satellite that's no longer operational, what are the specific challenges there, and how do you approach these difficult docking scenarios or capture scenarios?
There's a lot of challenges. Uncooperative docking is one of the most difficult things that we are tackling at OBRUTA. When everything's cooperative, that's like you're parking in your spot in the lot. It doesn't move. It's an easy target to hit. An uncooperative object in space is often tumbling, sometimes at very high rates. Because you're in microgravity, the way the objects move up there are sometimes a little erratic to what we might expect to see anything tumbling like on the ground. And so that would be like parking in a spot that is spinning not only on the pavement, but also coming off the pavement sometimes and just really flying all over the place. So there's a lot of challenges there to make sure that your trajectory is going in safely to that object. And if you've ever seen the movie Interstellar, and you know the part in the movie where they have to dock with the space station after there's an explosion and it's spinning about its axis, they have to spin to match that rate before they can go into dock. And that's an example of the easiest possible uncooperative docking that could be happening. If there was any other axis involved, it becomes extremely difficult or even impossible for some spacecraft to go in and dock it. So the way we're designing the system at OBRUTA is to not need any additional aids like targeting fiducials or retroreflectors or crosstalk between the two spacecraft. If it's an old rocket body and it has maybe exploded in space and it doesn't look like when we launched it, our system can still recognize that, appropriately track it, and determine the optimal path to close the distance between it and safely dock with it. And that's really the end goal for docking with anything in space that we're developing for.
Reflecting on your journey from academic research to building OBRUTA, what advice would you give to other aspiring engineers and entrepreneurs looking to tackle ambitious projects in the fields like debris retrieval or GNC technology?
Yeah, one thing I've always come back to is you just have to, wake up every day, be passionate about what you're doing, and really, really enjoy the journey. These things take a lot of time. Companies take a lot of time and effort to build. And as long as you are still passionate about it, you will get there at the end one way or another. A lot of the times we hear about companies having difficulties due to co-founder disagreements. Oftentimes companies will also run out of just money. And those are the two we hear about the most for why companies fail. If you can remove one of those issues from the equation right out by finding people you enjoy working with, finding problems you enjoy working on, and truly just getting to enjoy a career doing something that you love. At the end of the day, that's one of the best things you can be doing, and one of the best motivations you can have for getting up every day and working on these very, very difficult problems.
Looking to the future, are there specific technologies or industry trends that you're excited about or that you think will play a crucial role in orbital debris retrieval and in orbit servicing?
Yeah, a few. I'm very, very interested in things like 3D printing, robotics, and other manufacturing capabilities. I think there's a lot of very interesting technologies coming down the pipeline with applications in space in all of those areas. Things for assembling very large structures in space that are much larger than any single launch vehicle could ever put up into space. That will take complex robotics arms that can autonomously build things and structures in space, or print new structures in space. As for in space manufacturing, there's a lot of promise there for moving a lot of heavy and polluting industry off world, as well as developing new products that can help humans all over Earth. One that I'm really hopeful for that I've heard about is the ability to 3D print new organs for donors in space. Because on Earth, the support structures that are there when you 3D print can damage the organs. But in space, you could 3D print them without those support structures, return them back to Earth, and deliver them to a hospital all within a matter of hours or days. So in the future, if you need a new knee or heart, that could come from space, and that is just such a interesting and cool concept to potentially realize within our lifetimes. So very excited for some of the ways that we'll use this foundational infrastructure from the in-space economy. But in order to get there, we need to develop the foundation that everything else can be built on.
And as we wrap up, are there any final thoughts or announcements you might have for our listeners?
Well, right now, I'm very thankful for the time, the opportunity to be on this podcast. We are raising a venture round at OBRUTA right now. So if you are interested in supporting the team in that manner, or even joining the team, you can find out more info and contact us through our website. We're always looking for great talent and great partners to join our team. We're looking forward to the new year. We have several new projects starting, and wrapping up our testing on board the International Space Station will be very interesting. And we're just looking forward to the year ahead, where we're going to realize our full-scale demo and get this RPOD technology to the commercial market and supporting our customers.
Where can our listeners and viewers find you?
So we are at OBRUTA or at OBRUTA Space Solutions on virtually every social media platform. You can find us on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, or our website at obruta.com. You can also reach out to myself or my co-founder through any of those mediums as well, and we're always happy to chat.
Cool. Well, Kevin, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been incredibly insightful conversation. And to our listeners, that's a wrap for this episode. Until next time, this is Omar Alayli, and you've been listening to the Omar Alayli podcast. Keep exploring.